stand before the towering gates of ancient Babylon, and you would stand before the single greatest, richest city the world had ever truly known. Its mighty walls stretched so impossibly wide that a dozen chariots could race side by side along their tops, unbroken, for miles and miles. Its soaring ziggurats reached toward the heavens, and its legendary hanging gardens whispered of a power that seemed eternal and unshakable. But beneath all that golden glory, dangerous cracks were quietly spreading, and Babylon's final, fatal chapter had already silently begun. Under King Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon became the beating heart of the ancient world, both deeply feared and endlessly admired by all. Merchants from Egypt, Persia, Arabia, and India crowded its bustling markets, trading spices, silver, and stories beneath towering temples. The mighty Euphrates River ran straight through the city's beating core, carrying countless boats loaded with grain, wine, and precious cut stone. At night, flickering torches lit the processional way, where lions of glazed blue brick seemed to prowl silently along the ancient sacred walls. Priests climbed the towering Etemenanke ziggurat, believed by many scholars today to be the true inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel. For decades, Babylon felt utterly untouchable, a city so vast and so wealthy that its collapse seemed simply impossible for anyone to imagine. Then in 562 BC, Nebuchadnezzar finally died, and the sprawling empire he had painstakingly built through decades of war lost its steady hand. His son, Amel-Marduk, ruled for barely 2 short years before being brutally murdered by his own brother-in-law in a bloody palace coup at night. The throne passed rapidly from hand to hand, each new king weaker than the last, while the nobility whispered dark plots in shadowed halls. Assassinations became almost routine, and the once unshakable royal court grew paranoid, deeply fractured, and dangerously divided within. Outside the palace walls, ordinary Babylonians watched their leaders devour one another, while the empire's distant borders quietly thinned. In less than a single decade, the throne that Nebuchadnezzar had painstakingly built for a dynasty had already betrayed his own bloodline. In 556 BC, a strange and deeply unconventional king named Nabonidus seized the throne, and Babylon would never again feel truly stable or safe. Nabonidus was obsessed not with Marduk, Babylon's own patron god, but with Sin, the ancient and distant moon deity worshipped far in Haran. He ordered grand temples rebuilt in Sin's honor, and the powerful priesthood of Marduk simmered quietly with dangerous growing resentment. Then astonishingly, Nabonidus abandoned his own capital entirely, retreating for years to the remote and dusty desert oasis of Tayma in Arabia. For nearly a full decade, Babylon's king ruled from distant exile, while his son Belshazzar governed a city that felt increasingly leaderless. Sacred festivals went uncelebrated in the absent king's place, and the people slowly began to feel that even the gods themselves had left. Far to the east, a fearsome new power was rising with terrifying speed, uniting scattered tribes and kingdoms under one ambitious young crown. Cyrus the Great of Persia had already conquered both Media and Lydia, swallowing entire empires whole in a matter of just a few short years. His armies were fiercely disciplined, his diplomacy relentless, and his ambitious eyes had already turned toward the riches of Mesopotamia. Babylonian scouts brought urgent warnings of Persian forces massing along the eastern frontier, but Nabonidus remained stubbornly distracted. Vassal cities that once feared Babylon began quietly negotiating with Cyrus instead, sensing which growing empire truly held the future now. The storm was steadily gathering on the horizon, and inside the city, almost no one seemed willing or able to prepare for what was coming. Inside Babylon's ancient walls, the damage was not only political, but deeply spiritual, and the ordinary people felt profoundly abandoned. The priesthood of Marduk, stripped of royal favor for years, began quietly welcoming the idea of a different and far more devout ruler soon. Heavy taxation to fund Nabonidus's distant campaigns strained ordinary families, while the nobility feasted behind high, gilded palace walls. Trade routes grew increasingly unstable as neighboring powers quietly realigned, and merchants once loyal to Babylon looked elsewhere for allies. Rumors spread rapidly through crowded streets that Cyrus promised religious freedom, restoration, and deep respect for every local god there. Babylon's greatest weakness was no longer waiting outside its walls, but the growing hollowness quietly spreading somewhere deep within them. In October of 539 BC, Cyrus's advancing army marched toward Opis, a heavily fortified city guarding the direct approach to Babylon itself. The Babylonian forces, disorganized and thoroughly demoralized, met the Persians in a brutal clash along the muddy banks of the Tigris River. The defeat was swift and utterly devastating, and news of the slaughter raced far ahead of the retreating soldiers toward the capital city. Panic spread rapidly through Babylon's crowded streets as terrified families realized the army meant to protect them had simply ceased to exist. Nabonidus fled the doomed city entirely, abandoning his own throne, while priests and nobles anxiously debated whether resistance was possible. Behind Babylon's legendary walls, the frightened people waited, uncertain whether their ancient defenses could still manage to save them at all. On the night of October 12th, Persian engineers secretly diverted the Euphrates River, lowering its level far beneath the great city walls. Soldiers waded silently through the shallow riverbed under cover of darkness, slipping beneath fortifications once thought entirely unbreakable. Inside the city, according to ancient accounts, a royal feast continued on, oblivious to the shadows quietly moving through the water gates. By the break of dawn, Persian soldiers stood inside Babylon's sacred heart, and remarkably, almost no blood had been spilled at all that night. Cyrus entered not as a brutal destroyer, but as a liberator, restoring temples and proudly declaring himself chosen by the god Marduk himself. The greatest city on earth had fallen not through fire and prolonged siege, but through neglect, division, and a single river turned aside. Babylon's walls still stood tall, its temples still gleamed brightly in the sun, yet the empire behind them had quietly ceased to exist forever. Its fall was not one single dramatic battle, but years of fractured leadership, forgotten gods, and steadily eroding trust from deep within. The lesson of Babylon still echoes powerfully through history, that even the mightiest civilizations can collapse quietly from the inside. If this journey through Babylon's final days pulled you in, make sure to subscribe for more cinematic history documentaries like this one. Tell us down in the comments which lost city or fallen empire you want us to bring back to life next in our very next documentary episode. Because history, much like Babylon itself, never truly disappears. It simply waits beneath the sand for someone to come and find it again.